The day I stepped into this house as a daughter-in-law, there was no welcoming party, no blessing. There was only an ice-cold sentence from my mother-in-law, Mrs. Victoria, when I hesitantly called her mom. "Don't call me mom," she said, her examining eyes sweeping from head to toe as if I were a defective product. "You are just a mistake that my son has to fix." A 37-year-old woman who has been through a marriage already. Those words hit me harder than a slap. I stood there, in the middle of their living room, clearly feeling that I was an intruder, a stain in her perfect family portrait. My husband, Julian, the man 5 years younger than me whom I loved, just stood there avoiding my eyes. He muttered, "Mom doesn't mean anything by it, don't take it to heart." I tried to swallow that lump because I thought my sincerity would melt even the largest iceberg. I foolishly believed that if you sow enough seeds of kindness, even the most barren land would bloom. And for 3 years, exactly 3 years, I did not stop sowing. My father-in-law, Mr. William, a gentle man buried under the shadow of his wife, suffered from severe macular degeneration. His vision worsened day by day, making him walk clumsily and break things. Oh my God, this useless old man. Mrs. Victoria would often snap whenever she heard something fall. "All day long you're just a burden." Julian would only sigh, "Dad, can you be more careful? I'm so tired of you already." They only saw inconvenience. But I saw fear in his cloudy eyes. I was the one who quietly took him to the best eye hospital in the city, using my writing royalties to buy the expensive imported eye drops the doctor prescribed. Each month, that tiny bottle cost me nearly $300, money I never told Julian about. And more importantly, every night, when the whole family had sunk into their own worlds, I would sit beside Mr. Williams' old armchair and read books to him. Today let's continue chapter 10 of The Count of Monte Cristo, okay, Dad? I said. He didn't say much, just nodded, but his trembling hand would find my shoulder and pat it gently. "Without you, Isabella," he once whispered, his voice choking, "my eyes would probably already be completely blind, and my soul would have died in darkness, too." My seeds weren't only for the old man. They were also for a child abandoned in his own home. Alex, my brother-in-law, 14 years old, was at the most rebellious and lonely age. Mrs. Victoria was too busy with parties and maintaining appearances to remember she had a son who needed his mother. She only remembered to scold him when he did something wrong. "This Friday I have a basketball game," Alex said to me at dinner, his eyes not daring to look at his mother. "Really?" I said excitedly. "What time?" "I'll come cheer for you." Mrs. Victoria looked up from her salad plate, her voice sour. "Nonsense. Focus on studying. I don't want to hear the teacher call again complaining about your grades." Such embarrassment. Alex lowered his head and didn't say another word. Of course, she never came. Julian was always busy. Only I sat alone in the bleachers, cheering for every shot he made. I was also the only one who remembered his study schedule, the one who stayed up until 2 in the morning to help him finish a volcano model for his science project. "Mom never asks about my homework," Alex once told me as we were gluing the last layers of newspaper. "Only you do." When he was bullied at school and came home with a bruise on his cheek, the first person he came to was me, not his biological mother. I held him in my arms, listened to him cry, and the next day, I went to school to talk to the principal. I did everything a mother should do. My sacrifices also existed in every square meter of my parents-in-law's house. With my savings and large royalties, I spent $40,000 to renovate the entire old house. I replaced the plumbing system, repainted the walls, redid the kitchen with the most modern appliances so that Mrs. Victoria would have an easier time. "Mom said the renovated house looks great," Julian told me, but a direct thank you from Mrs. Victoria never existed. She simply enjoyed it as something she was entitled to. I had done everything. Wife, daughter-in-law, caretaker, tutor, sponsor. A perfect multitasker. But the recognition I received was a perfectly round 0. At family gatherings, in front of friends and relatives, Mrs. Victoria still treated me like a ghost. "Oh, this is Isabella," she would say with a pale smile, "Julian's friend." Friend. Not wife, not daughter-in-law. Just a friend. Sometimes she didn't even bother introducing me, letting me stand awkward and isolated among strangers. My existence was an embarrassment to her, an unpleasant truth she wanted to hide. I was the stain on her family's prestigious cloak. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that actions mattered more than words. But that illusion shattered on a winter afternoon. Last month, I spent 2 weeks hand-knitting a cashmere sweater for Mrs. Victoria, in jade green, her favorite color. I carefully selected the best type of cashmere, stayed up late to finish it in time for her birthday. When I gave it to her, she only glanced at it and said flatly, "Thanks, it's all right." Then tossed it onto a chair. Today, when I went to the backyard to look for pruning shears, I saw their hunting dog, Brutus, curled up in his kennel, and the thing lining his bedding, the thing he was gnawing on, covered in mud and drool, was that jade green sweater. The blood in my body felt frozen. Every stitch, every fiber, every hour I poured into it, all the love and effort, was lying under a dog. I stood motionless, staring at that filthy bundle of yarn. The winter wind blew sharp and cold, but I didn't feel it. Inside me, something had died. I realized a brutal truth. My kindness could not make barren land bloom. It was only being thrown into a black hole of contempt and ingratitude. And I, the foolish sower, had wasted 3 years of my life cultivating a piece of land that never wanted to receive anything from me. From the day the cashmere sweater was turned into dog bedding, the naivety in me completely died. I no longer cried in secret, no longer asked myself what I did wrong. Instead, a cold stillness enveloped me. I began to observe, not as a daughter-in-law trying to fit in, but as a scientist studying a toxic organism. I wanted to know how far cruelty could go. And Mrs. Victoria did not disappoint. Her campaign began quietly, in the most vulnerable public place, Alex's school gate. That day I went to pick up the boy after his basketball game. Several other parents were standing and chatting. When I approached, their conversation stopped, but I still caught the poisonous whispers. "Look, the new wife of Julian over there," a woman said, her voice full of fake pity. "I heard she's much older than her husband, and has already been through a marriage before." A different person stepped in, their voice even more vicious. "So the kid with her is her illegitimate child that she brought into her husband's family? Poor them, picking up such trouble. Probably trapped the young guy so she could cling to him." I froze, those words stabbing into my ears like poison-tipped needles. Illegitimate child. They were talking about Alex, my brother-in-law whom I loved like my own brother, the one whose mother had never once come to the school gate to pick him up. But today was strange. I saw Mrs. Victoria standing nearby. I looked toward her, hoping for a word of defense, a denial. But no. She just stood there, the corner of her lips lifting into an almost imperceptible smile. A satisfied smile. She said nothing, but her silence was the most disgusting form of agreement. She was enjoying this public humiliation. Alex ran out, saw me, and exclaimed, "Sister Isabella, I scored 2 goals today." I forced a smile, grabbed his hand, and led him away quickly, escaping that crowd of venomous mouths. That night, I said nothing to Julian. I knew it would be pointless. He would say again, "Whatever people say, just ignore it. Why do you care?" He didn't understand. These were not careless rumors. This was a campaign launched by his own mother, meant to destroy my reputation. But she didn't just want me to suffer emotionally. She wanted to annihilate me completely. The next blow targeted my career, my livelihood, the only thing that gave me independence and dignity. A week later, I received a call from Mr. Miller, the editor-in-chief of my publishing house. "Isabella, I need you to come to the office immediately, his voice unusually serious. We need to clarify some sensitive issues. My heart tightened. When I arrived, Mr. Miller handed me a stack of printed emails. They were sent from an anonymous address to the entire leadership and our key partners, he explained. My hands trembled as I read each line. They were a blatant, fabricated indictment. The anonymous sender accused me of plagiarizing ideas from a young author, stealing translation copyrights, and even worse. They invented stories about a promiscuous sex life, claiming I used my body to get book deals. Who could do this? I stammered, feeling nauseous. I don't know, Isabella, Mr. Miller said, worry clouding his eyes. But this language is extremely toxic. It seriously affects your reputation and the publishers. We've temporarily halted your new book project for investigation. I need you to prove your innocence. I felt the ground collapse beneath me. 15 years in publishing, not a single stain on my record. Now my entire career hung by a thread. I asked the publisher's IT department to trace the emails. The results came 2 days later. The IP address originated from a public Wi-Fi network, ma'am, the technician said over the phone. Specifically, from the cafe The Daily Grind on Oak Avenue. The Daily Grind. My whole body turned cold. That was Victoria's favorite cafe, where she and her circle of old friends met 3 times a week. There was no mistaking it. This wasn't ordinary hatred. This was a deliberate act of destruction. She wanted to strip me of everything, my honor, my job, and my independence. But the cruelest blow hadn't come yet. It didn't come from the enemy who had already shown her face, it came from the husband I loved. That night, Julian came home looking uneasy, holding a stack of documents. Isabella, he began, voice hesitant. We need to talk. He avoided my eyes and placed the documents on the table. They were papers related to the apartment we lived in, an apartment to which I had contributed 40% of the purchase price with the money from selling my book rights. What is this, Julian? I asked, my voice already turning cold. Mom is worried, he stammered. Mom said you've been divorced once. She's afraid. If something ever happens, then property disputes. She doesn't want me to suffer losses. Suffer losses. I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. 40% of the money in this home is mine. My sweat and tears. You call that suffering losses? No, that's not what I meant, he waved his hands quickly. It's just to put Mom at ease. She wants you to sign this. It's just a formality. It confirms that the apartment will be in my name only. That way our family will be peaceful, no more turbulence. A peaceful family. He wanted me to relinquish my own assets to buy that fake peace. I looked deep into Julian's eyes, searching for even a trace of the man I loved, the man who promised to protect me. But I saw nothing. Only cowardice, selfishness, and a pathetic fear of his domineering mother. Victoria had manipulated him, turning him into a weapon to attack his own wife. Julian, I said, my voice frighteningly calm. Do you know what your mother has done? She stood watching while people insulted me at the school gate. She sent anonymous emails to destroy my career. And now she's instructing her own son to steal his wife's property. Do you know that? Mom didn't mean that, he muttered, the same weak, familiar line. She's just cautious. Don't complicate things. Just sign it, Isabella. For me, for our family. I looked at the document on the table, then at the man in front of me. He was not an ally. He wasn't even a bystander, he was part of the opposing side. He had chosen his team. I didn't say another word. I pushed the stack of papers back to him. I didn't sign. But in that moment, something far more important than a property certificate shattered beyond repair my trust. And in the ruins of that trust, a completely different Isabella began to form. After the night Julian handed me the property transfer documents, a wall of ice rose between us. He tried to make peace, bought bouquets whose scent I could no longer smell, said apologies my ears no longer wanted to hear. He didn't understand that what he broke wasn't an ordinary argument, it was the foundation of this marriage. Trust, once cracked, never heals the same. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he said one morning as I was packing a small suitcase. "I'll never ask you to do that again. Please don't be mad at me." "I'm not angry," I replied, calm, emotionless. "I just need to go on a business trip for a few days. The publishing house is facing issues because of those anonymous emails. I need to meet the partners in person to resolve it." It was a carefully calculated lie. It was true that I needed to handle the crisis, but not with a business trip. I needed space to breathe, to think, and most importantly, to observe the enemy without being noticed. I needed to confirm one last suspicion before officially terminating this marriage in my mind. "How long will you be gone?" Julian asked, his voice anxious, as if afraid I would leave forever. "I'll come back when everything is settled," I said vaguely, zipping the suitcase. I drove away from the house, but halfway to the airport, I turned back. I parked on a street a few blocks from my in-laws' house, pulled a wool beanie low over my head, and put on sunglasses. I walked toward the house I had poured so much money and effort into renovating, a house that now felt as foreign as enemy territory. The house was quiet. I walked like a ghost through the shiny kitchen that I myself designed, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I heard it. The sharp laughter of Mrs. Victoria echoing from the living room, mixed with the voice of another woman. She was entertaining guests. Perfect. I hid behind the wall separating the dining room and the living room, a hidden spot where I could hear everything clearly. "You're really lucky, Victoria." A woman's voice that I recognized as Mrs. Gables, my mother-in-law's close friend, was blaring. "Handsome son, stable career, and even married a rich wife who's willing to spend money renovating the house for his parents." I heard the clinking of glassware. "Rich is rich." Mrs. Victoria's voice rose, full of contempt. "But her manners are unbearable. You don't know, she's the type of old woman who's already been through one marriage. Now she clings to my Julian like a leech. All day she only pretends to be virtuous and gentle to fool the world." These words no longer surprised me. I had heard variations of them too many times. But I still stood still, listening. Something told me the most disgusting part was still ahead. "Really?" Mrs. Gable asked curiously. "But I saw she takes good care of your William and Alex. I heard she even spent her own money to buy medicine for him." Here it was. Mrs. Victoria paused for a moment, then lowered her voice, a whisper full of venom, the kind of voice one only uses when about to release the most sickening slander. "Take care," she hissed softly. "You think she's actually kind? Not at all. A flirtatious woman like her, everything she does has a purpose. I've noticed. Don't you see the way she looks at my husband lately? It's not normal. So sweet, so strangely affectionate. I'm telling you, maybe she finds my Julian too young, so she plans to seduce her father-in-law. Women who've been through one marriage, there's nothing they wouldn't dare to do." A moment of deadly silence fell. My whole body trembled violently. A wave of nausea rose from my stomach. Not hatred. Not contempt. This was the filthiest slander, a stab straight into my dignity and the respect I had for Mr. William. She had twisted my kindness into a lustful scheme, turned my care into an act of seduction. I wanted to rush out, wanted to scream into her face, wanted to flip over her tea table. But some cold force held me back. Anger was useless. Emotion was the weapon of the weak. Now, I needed evidence. My trembling hand fumbled in my coat pocket, searching for my phone. My eyes blurred from a silent fury, but my fingers were still steady enough to swipe the screen, open the recording app. I took a deep breath, held it, and pressed record. "Really? Mrs. Gable's voice rang again, full of shock and glee. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. The girl looks so gentle but—" "Gentle?" Mrs. Victoria scoffed. "Just a facade. Let me tell you another thing." She continued to pour out horrifying words, weaving a ridiculous story about how I intentionally dressed provocatively when reading to my father-in-law, about how I deliberately touched his hand. Every word she said was recorded, becoming a digital bullet. I stood there, motionless like a statue, listening to my dignity being trampled, while the phone in my hand quietly collected the weapon. I had recorded nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of lies, of venom, of the truly disgusting face behind the respectable facade of a mother, a wife, a grandmother. When Mrs. Gable began saying goodbye, I quietly pressed stop, saved the file with a simple name, The Truth. I did not wait for them to leave the room. I turned around, as silently as when I came, slipped out the back door, and disappeared into the empty street. I did not cry. I did not scream. What I felt now was no longer pain or hurt. The pain had reached a threshold where it transformed into something else. A cold transparency. Isabella, the daughter-in-law who tried to use kindness to earn acceptance, died right behind that living room wall. I returned home 2 days later. The 10-minute recording lay neatly in a heavily protected folder on my phone, a time bomb waiting for the right moment to explode. Julian greeted me with a guilty look, while Mrs. Victoria glanced at me then turned away, assuming my silence was a sign of submission. She was wrong. My silence was not surrender. It was the stillness before the storm. An amateur would immediately throw that recording into their faces, screaming and gloating in an earth-shaking confrontation. But I was not an amateur. I was a book editor. My job was to arrange chapters, build plot lines, and ensure every character received the ending they deserved. I would not counterattack impulsively. I would build a fortress, recruit allies, and make sure when the war broke out, I would be the one standing on the ramparts looking down at the enemy, completely isolated. My first ally was the person I least expected, but also the most important, Mr. William. Saturday morning, I came to his room. "Dad, the weather's nice today," I said gently. "Would you like me to take you to the park for a walk? Fresh air will be good for you." He was surprised, but nodded in agreement. Julian and Victoria watched us with puzzled faces. They were too used to William wandering around the house like a shadow. We sat on a stone bench facing the lake. After a few minutes of silence, I took out my phone and plugged in the earphones. "Dad," I said, still calm. "There are some things I think you need to know. I don't want you to argue or defend anyone. I just need you to hear the truth." I gave him one earbud and played the recording, but I cleverly cut off the beginning. I only let him hear 2 parts. The first part was when Mrs. Victoria called him, "That useless old man, when will he die already so I can stop being tired?" The second part, even more cruel, was when she whispered that I was trying to seduce him. When those words played, I saw Mr. William's shoulders collapse. His gentle face twisted in pain. His hands, already trembling from age, now trembled for another reason. He said nothing, just listened until the end. When I stopped the recording, he sat still, his cloudy eyes staring far across the lake. "Dad," I began, but didn't know what else to say. "Don't say anything, Isabella." He cut me off, his voice hoarse. "I'm not surprised. I've lived with that contempt for 40 years. I just never thought she could be cruel enough to drag you into her filth." He turned to look at me, and for the first time, I saw in his nearly sightless eyes a clarity and absolute respect. "You are a good child, Isabella. Better than what this family deserves. What do you want me to do?" "I don't need you to argue with Mom," I replied firmly. "That's useless and will only hurt you more. I just need you to know the truth. And when I start taking action, I need your silence. Just don't interfere, don't take their side." That is already the greatest help. 8. Mr. William nodded, a decisive nod. I promise. We sat there for a while longer. One ally had been recruited. The first wall of the fortress had been built. My next target was Alex. The boy was a more difficult challenge. He was her biological son, and I knew Victoria had already started a campaign of dripping poison into his mind. Lately, Alex had begun avoiding me. He no longer ran to tell me about school, no longer invited me to play games with him. Sister Isabella, he said one evening when I asked about his homework. Mom said you're not a good person. Mom said you're plotting to harm our family. My heart ached, but I did not reveal any emotion. Explaining or justifying myself now would only confuse the boy even more. Arguing with a child about his mother is a battle that cannot be won. I needed a different strategy. Is that so? I simply replied. Then this weekend, do you want to go watch the Lakers basketball game? I have 2 tickets in pretty good seats. Alex's eyes lit up. That was his favorite team. Really? But Mom won't let me go. Just tell her you're going to the library for a group study session with friends. This stays between you and me. On the way to the stadium, the air in the car was quite tense. But when the game started, the excitement of the crowd erased all distance. We shouted together, groaned together at missed shots, and burst with joy together when the home team scored. During those 2 hours, we were not sister-in-law and brother-in-law in a stormy family. We were just 2 fans sharing a passion. On the way back, when the excitement had faded, I began to talk. I did not mention Mrs. Victoria at all. Alex, I said, my eyes still looking straight ahead. Do you remember when you and I stayed up until 2 in the morning building that volcano model? Yes, he mumbled. Do you remember who was the only one who showed up to every one of your games? It was you. Do you remember who went to school to talk to the principal when you were bullied? Still you. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to look straight into the boy's eyes. I will never speak ill of your mother. She is your mother. But I want to ask you just one question, and I want you to think very carefully before answering. Do you choose to believe what other people say about me, or do you choose to believe what you yourself have seen and experienced with me for the past 3 years? Alex was silent for a long moment. I saw the struggle in his young eyes. On one side were his mother's words. On the other were my actions. Emotional manipulation versus logical truth. Finally, he looked up, his voice small but firm. I believe you. I smiled, a smile of genuine relief, and patted his head. Thank you. I had gained my second ally. A young ally, but one who held the heart of this family. As I drove home, I felt a powerful confidence. Inside their own house, right under their noses, I had completed my fortress. Mrs. Victoria and Julian were still busy with their petty schemes, not realizing they had already been isolated. They thought they were cornering me. They didn't know that they were the ones standing alone on a deserted island, and the tide of truth was beginning to rise. My fortress was now firmly built with 2 silent allies. Mr. William now treated me with a cautious respect, his eyes containing a kind of understanding that needed no words. Alex had returned to being my little brother, secretly sharing with me bits of school stories behind his mother's back. Mrs. Victoria, too proud in her imagined victory, did not notice this change. She only saw me becoming quieter and assumed she had broken my will. She was wrong. I was not broken. I was forging my weapon. Now it was time to shift from defense to attack. But I would not attack with swords or shouting. My weapon would be far more subtle. I would use her very own nature against her. I spent a week studying and analyzing Mrs. Victoria as if analyzing a character in a novel. She had 3 fatal weaknesses, 3 cracks in her armor of self-satisfaction. First, and most obvious, greed without limits. She craved money and status like a person in the desert craves water. Second, always pretending to be virtuous, guarding her reputation. She could be a demon behind closed doors, but in public, she had to be a saint. This contradiction was her Achilles heel. And the third, also her greatest weakness, shallow and ignorant. She had the street-smart cunning of a petty schemer, but she was completely clueless about the law, about complicated procedures, and about the world beyond her tiny pond. My plan would be built around these three fragile pillars. I began to act. I contacted a small but reputable law firm in another city, 3 hours away by car. I didn't want to leave any trace that could be tracked. I presented them with a strange request, to draft a fake set of documents, identical to real ones, about a will and an inheritance. "Are you sure, Miss Isabella?" The elderly lawyer, Mr. Harris, asked me over the phone, his voice full of doubt. "This is quite unusual." "I am certain, sir," I replied. "This is not an act of fraudulent asset appropriation. This is a social experiment within a family. I will pay double for discretion and perfect accuracy in every detail of the documents. I need them to be flawless from seals and signatures to the type of paper used." After some persuasion, Mr. Harris agreed. 2 days later, a package was sent to the P.O. box I had rented. Inside was a perfect set of documents. I had my bait. Friday evening, when the whole family was having dinner, I executed the first step. I knew Julian had a habit of checking the mailbox after dinner. I pretended to accidentally leave the letter on the small table near the front door, mixed in with bills and magazines. It was an elegant cream-colored envelope, with the embossed seal of the Harris law firm. Inside was a copy of the will. "You forgot this letter again, Isabella," Julian said when he came back inside, holding the envelope. "Looks important." "Oh, it's probably just advertising, honey," I replied, pretending not to care, though my heart beat a little faster. "Just toss it onto my desk." I knew he wouldn't. Curiosity would win. And indeed it did. About an hour later, while I was in my office, I heard the door creak open. Julian sneaked in, thinking I was wearing headphones. He tiptoed to the desk and picked up the letter. Through the reflection on my computer screen, I saw him tear open the envelope nervously. I saw his eyes widen as he read the lines inside. I had crafted the content carefully. A cousin of mine in France, someone my family had cherished, had just passed away. He had no children and had left the remainder of his estate to the only niece he had greatly adored, me. The amount was clearly written, a number large enough to cloud the eyes of any greedy person, $1.5 million. But that wasn't the most interesting part. The key lay in the disbursement clause. I had written it as a trap designed specifically for Mrs. Victoria. The will stated, "This estate will be placed under the management of a trust for 12 months. After 12 months, the full amount will be dispersed to Miss Isabella, with one single condition: Miss Isabella must prove that she is living in a happy, stable family environment, loved, supported, and respected by her husband's family. To ensure this, a trust representative will be appointed to secretly monitor and evaluate Miss Isabella's life during this time. Any behavior causing harm to Miss Isabella's emotional well-being from the husband's family may result in forfeiture of the inheritance." It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It not only promised a rather large sum of money, but also turned me, from someone who was hated, into a golden egg that needed to be protected. My happiness was now directly tied to their wallet. I saw Julian read the paper over and over again, his hand trembling. He didn't bother to pay attention to its logic. He only saw the number $1.5 million. Immediately, he rushed out of the room, forgetting even to close the door. I took off my headphones. I wasn't listening to music. I was listening to the sound of his footsteps running to my mother-in-law's house. I didn't need to hear the content of the conversation. I could imagine it. The initial suspicion, then the greed rising, and finally a plan beginning to form in their petty minds. I sat still in the study room, turned on the small surveillance camera system I had secretly installed in my mother-in-law's living room a few weeks ago. The app on my phone showed a clear image. Victoria and Julian were sitting with their heads close together on the sofa, whispering. I couldn't hear the sound, but I saw their expressions. Victoria's eyes lit up in an unusual way, a light of calculation and opportunity. She was speaking very fast, waving her hands. Julian was nodding rapidly like a puppet. The fish had bitten the hook. No, it had to be said that an entire swarm of sharks had lunged at the bait. They thought they were about to have a feast. They didn't know that inside that bait was a steel hook, and the one holding the fishing line, this time, was me. The game had begun, and the stage had been set. Now it was time to wait and see how excellently these greedy actors would perform their play. The change didn't just come quickly, it came ridiculously. The next morning, I didn't wake up because of the alarm clock, but because of the smell of pancakes and coffee coming from the kitchen. I stepped out and froze. Victoria, the woman whom I had not seen touch anything besides making tea for herself in the past 3 years, was standing at the stove. She wore a brand new pink apron and was carefully flipping a pancake. Oh, Isabella, you're up? She turned around, giving me a radiant smile that made me shiver. Sit down, dear, I'm making a special breakfast for our whole family. Julian was already sitting at the dining table, looking at me with the eyes of a puppy waiting to be praised. Mom woke up at 6 in the morning to prepare this, he said proudly. I sat down, feeling like I had stepped into a parallel universe. Victoria placed a plate of pancakes covered with strawberries and maple syrup in front of me. Eat it while it's hot. You look too thin lately, you've been working hard. You need to eat more. I picked up the fork, feeling nauseous. Every bite I took tasted like fake kindness. This wasn't breakfast. This was her first investment into the $1.5 million. The dress you're wearing today is so beautiful, she added again, not allowing any silence. This shade of blue suits your skin tone so well. Makes you look 10 years younger. For 3 years, she had never complimented me once. Today, within 5 minutes, I received more compliments than the entire past 3 years combined. The play had begun, and she was an astonishingly terrible actress. The sudden change, with no transition, was so blatant it was almost an insult to my intelligence. Thank you, Mom, I replied softly, trying to act like a naive daughter-in-law touched by her change. You seem very different today. Different how, dear? She laughed. Maybe because I realized I had been too strict with you. I'm sorry, Isabella. Sometimes old people are picky. Don't take it to heart. Julian quickly cut in. That's right. Mom has been thinking a lot. She told me she cares about you very much. Ah, about the house. He hesitated. I'm sorry. I really was an idiot. Forget about it, okay? Whether that house belongs to you or to me, it belongs to both of us. I only nodded, my eyes watery like I was about to cry. The play had to be performed to the end. But the peak of the play came in the afternoon, when I was in the study. My phone rang. But I knew who it was. For the first time in this entire marriage, my mother-in-law called me first. Her voice on the other end was sweet, a honey mixed with poison that I could now taste the bitterness of. Isabella, she began, I'm just calling to ask if you want to go shopping with me this weekend. I saw a new store that has some beautiful dresses, extremely suitable for your figure. I stayed silent for a few seconds, just enough for her to feel insecure. I imagined her clutching the phone tightly, afraid the inheritance share would slip from her grasp. I used to long for such an invitation. Now, I only found it cheap and contemptible. You're so good to me, I replied, my voice carrying a carefully calculated innocence. But I don't dare accept. I'm afraid I'm not worthy. Oh, why would you say that? Victoria rushed, her voice panicked. You're my daughter-in-law, your family. There's nothing unworthy at all. Really? I asked, my voice trembling as if about to cry. But I always felt like I was the leftover in this house. I'm afraid your kindness now is only because you pity me. Or worse, because of some reason I don't know. There, I had thrown out the bait. I used the very words she used to insult me, wrapped them in a shell of insecurity, and threw them back. The short silence on the other end told me she had swallowed it whole. She had to soothe me. She had to prove her kindness was real. No, never. Victoria's voice became urgent, almost pleading. Isabella, you must believe me. That was something I said foolishly. It was my fault. You're not a leftover. You're a treasure of this family. Julian getting you is his great blessing. I'll do everything to prove that to you. Treasure. From a leftover dumped in a dog kennel, I had become a treasure overnight, all thanks to the power of a fortune that didn't exist. I smiled, a smile no one could see. She thought she was acting. She didn't know she was just a puppet in the play I wrote. Really? I sniffled. If you say so. Then this weekend, let's go. I'll cancel my appointment with my publisher. That's right, dear. She exclaimed, sounding relieved. What work anyway? You've worked so hard already, you need to relax. I hung up. No tears of indignation. No silent screams. Only the cold stillness of a chess player who had just made a decisive move. All these years, I tried to use sincerity to buy her affection. Now, I would use her greed to buy her downfall. That weekend, I experienced the most disgusting shopping trip of my life. Victoria dragged me into the most luxurious stores, picked out the most expensive dresses for me. You look beautiful in this one. Take it, dear, I'll pay. She shouted loudly, on purpose for the sales staff to hear. She held my hand, wrapped her arm around mine, laughing nonstop. Every kind gesture she made me feel filthy. But I still smiled, still thanked her, and still secretly used my phone to record these happy mother-in-law and daughter-in-law moments. I took selfies of the two of us smiling brightly. These would be perfect evidence for my secret trustee representative. On the way home, she stopped by a bakery. Mom will buy a cake so after you finish working tonight you can eat it, okay? Remember, don't work too late, dear. I looked at her, and a thought suddenly flashed through my mind. Money can't buy happiness, people often say. But today, I realized another truth. Greed, ladies and gentlemen, greed can buy a perfectly detailed family performance. And I, the director of this play, was starting to enjoy my role. The happy family play lasted for more than a month. The longest and most disgusting month of my life. Every morning, I had to endure meals cooked by Victoria, dishes seasoned with pretense. Every evening, I had to listen to Julian's caring inquiries, words coming from his mouth but carrying the shadow of his mother. They treated me like a queen, but I felt like a prisoner being fattened before execution. I knew the play couldn't last. A suspicious person who always wanted to control everything like Victoria would never fully trust a will that fell from the sky. She would not sit still and wait for 12 months. Her greed was great, but her fear of being tricked was even greater. She needed reassurance. She needed leverage over me, an ace up her sleeve in case I received the money and turned my back on them. And in her ignorance, she handed me that ace herself. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. It was an unknown number. When I picked up, a familiar yet distant voice sounded. Isabella? It's me, Daniel. Daniel. My ex-husband. My heart skipped a beat not because of old feelings, but because of the surprise. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Daniel? What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm sorry for the sudden call, he said, his voice slightly hesitant. But something strange just happened. I think you should know. A woman just called me. She didn't give her name, just said she was a concerned friend of yours. My entire body tensed. I knew exactly who it was. What did she say? I asked, my voice turning cold. She said ridiculous things. Kept going around in circles asking about our old marriage. Why we divorced, whether it was because you had financial problems, whether you were not some kind of flirtatious woman. Daniel paused. It sounded like she was digging for some scandal in your past. Her tone was very condescending and rude. I told her straight that we divorced civilly and I had nothing bad to say about you, then I hung up. I was silent, but inside, a storm was forming. Unbelievable. She had dared to do this. While playing the role of a saintly mother-in-law, she secretly called my ex-husband to dig through my past, to search for weapons to humiliate me. Her vileness truly had no limits. Isabella, are you all right? Daniel asked when I stayed silent too long. Who is that crazy old woman? Are you in some kind of trouble? I'm fine, Daniel. I'm not in trouble, I replied, and then the craziest, boldest thought flashed through my mind. It lit up like lightning, revealing the path to final victory. On the contrary, you just gave me a wonderful opportunity. An opportunity? He said, surprised. I don't understand. Daniel, can I ask you for a favor? I asked, my voice now devoid of emotion, carrying only the determination of a general before a decisive battle. Something a little crazy, but it will help me teach a few people a lesson about being decent human beings. I told him the whole story from Victoria's hatred, the dirty schemes, to the inheritance trap I had set. Daniel listened silently, occasionally letting out shocked, "Oh my God," sounds. When I finished, he burst into laughter, not mocking, but impressed. Isabella, you really haven't changed at all. Always smart, honest, always giving your all for the people around you. But also very particular about one thing, never letting anyone bully you, he said. So, what do you want me to do in this play? He asked. I want you to play a role, I said. A very important role. I want you to play the trust representative from France. The other end of the line went silent for a moment. I knew this was a lot to ask. But I also knew Daniel. He was a good man. We divorced because we were no longer compatible, but we never hated each other. He always respected my decency. Are you sure? He finally spoke. She won't recognize me. And your husband doesn't he know my face? That's the point. I explained. I never showed anyone your photos, and you know you're the laziest person on earth when it comes to taking pictures. The newest photo of you is from 10 years ago, no one would recognize you. Or maybe she'll recognize your voice. But because she'll be so focused on that inheritance money, she'll be confused, dazzled, and forget everything else, trust me. Daniel laughed again. What a ruthless plan. I like it. All right, Isabella. I'll help you. Consider it my way of making up for not being able to protect you better in our marriage. Send me all the information about the will. I need to memorize my role. Thank you, Daniel. I owe you for this. No need to thank me. Consider it a theatrical performance. I also want to see in person what that woman looks like. We hung up. I felt a strong surge of adrenaline rush through my body. Victoria, in her attempt to find an ally against me, had unintentionally turned him into my strongest ally. That evening at the dinner table, while Victoria was placing a rib on my plate and Julian was telling a bland joke, I dropped a sentence as light as a feather. Oh, I forgot to tell everyone, I said, looking at my food. The law office just called. Next month, the trust representative will fly in from France. He wants to come to our house for dinner, to interview and directly evaluate my living environment. Clang. Julian's fork fell onto the plate, creating a piercing sound. Victoria's face froze, her smile twisting out of shape. Why so sudden? She stammered. They didn't inform you beforehand? Probably part of the secret evaluation process, Mom. I replied, lifting my eyes to hers with innocent cluelessness. I was surprised too. We'll have to prepare to welcome him properly. This is the decisive interview, after all. The air in the dining room thickened. I could hear their panicked heartbeats. The entire Victoria household fell into a silent frenzy. They didn't know the guest coming was not someone bringing them money. He was coming to reclaim the debt of my dignity. The play was entering its climax, and I was eagerly awaiting their performance. In the following days, my in-laws' house turned into a headquarters preparing to receive a head of state. Victoria ran around like a shuttle, ordering Julian to clean every corner, arrange expensive flower vases, and plan a feast fit for a wedding banquet. She even bought a brand new tea set just for that evening. The tension and excitement were obvious on her face, a strange mixture of greed and fear. "Isabella dear, what do you think of this tablecloth?" she asked me, holding up an ivory white linen cloth. "Is it elegant enough, dear?" "Yes, it's very beautiful, Mom," I replied, suppressing a smile. "You don't need to be too elaborate. I think he only wants to see a normal, warm family." "No," she dismissed immediately. "This is the first impression and also the last. We must show him that you're living very well in this house. Julian, go buy the best bottle of wine for me. Quickly." Julian hurried off like a puppet on strings. I sat on the sofa, quietly observing this chaotic play. They were pouring all their strength into building a perfect stage for their own downfall. At exactly 7 o'clock on Saturday evening, the doorbell rang. My heart beat a little faster, not because of worry, but because of excitement. Victoria hurriedly adjusted her clothes, took a deep breath, and opened the door with a carefully rehearsed smile. "Welcome, sir, thank you for .com. Her sentence got stuck halfway. The smile on her lips froze like a shattered mask. Standing at the door, in a luxurious gray suit, silk tie, and an expensive leather briefcase, was Daniel. He looked completely different from the image of my ex-husband, mature, cold, and full of authority. A perfect performance. "Good evening, ma'am," Daniel spoke, his voice low and clear. "I am Daniel Carter, the estate attorney for Mr. Thomas Carter. I'm here to meet Miss Isabella Richter." I saw Victoria's complexion shift from pale to ashy gray. Her lips moved but couldn't form a sound. I knew exactly what she was thinking. That voice. She was doubting and confused. Why did it sound so similar to the crazy guy she had called to dig up my past? "Mom? What's going on?" Julian asked from behind, not understanding why his mother was frozen at the door. Please come in, sir," Victoria stammered, her voice cracking, trying to stretch the corners of her mouth into an awkward smile. She stepped back, giving Daniel room to enter. I stood up, smiling. "Hello, Mr. Carter, thank you for coming all this way." "That is my duty, Miss Richter," Daniel replied, his gaze sweeping over me professionally before stopping at Julian and Victoria. "Nice to meet your family." The panic in Victoria's eyes was almost impossible to hide. I could see her brain working at full speed. She no longer cared about Daniel's voice. She had already fallen into the trap perfectly. Please have a seat," she pointed to the best chair. "Julian, pour tea for our guest." That dinner was the strangest and most torturous meal I had ever witnessed. Victoria and Julian had to force themselves to act like a happy family in front of my ex-husband. Daniel played his role flawlessly. He was cold, serious, and constantly asked sharp, difficult questions. "Ma'am," Daniel said after tasting the soup, "in the will, Mr. Thomas emphasized the importance of emotional support. Could you tell me how you have supported Isabella's married life?" Victoria nearly choked. She coughed a few times then quickly answered, "Oh, of course, sir. Isabella is like my own daughter. I always love and protect her. Isn't that right, dear?" She turned to me, her eyes almost pleading. "Yes, that's right," I answered softly. "Mom always cares for me." "Really?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. For example? Well, I often take her shopping, she racked her brain. Cook delicious meals for her. Always listen and give her helpful advice. Julian, tell him, isn't that right? Why yes, that's right. Julian nodded rapidly. My mother loves Isabella very much. My whole family loves her. Daniel turned to me. And how about your relationship with your husband, Miss Richter? Is he a good husband, always protecting and standing by you? That question was like a blade twisting straight into Julian. He swallowed, his face pale. Of course I love my wife. I always do everything for her, even requesting that she transfer her personal assets to you. Daniel's question sounded light, but its impact was no different from a bomb. Julian froze. Victoria dropped the soup bowl to the floor, creating a loud clatter. I don't understand what you're talking about. Julian stuttered. Oh, just a hypothetical question, Daniel smiled coldly. I need to make sure Isabella's happiness isn't threatened by any financial pressure. It's a very important clause in the will. The tension at the dinner table stretched like a violin string. Victoria tried to divert the conversation by placing a large piece of beef into my bowl. Eat, dear, you're too thin. She was desperately trying to steer the topic elsewhere. Throughout the meal, Daniel continued his interrogation. He asked about how I cared for Mr. William, asked about my relationship with Alex. Every answer Victoria gave was a clumsily painted lie. She had to tell touching stories about how she had been proud of me, how she saw me as a blessing to the family. At the end of dinner, when Daniel stood up to leave, he paused, looked at me with a meaningful expression only the two of us understood. After tonight, I can see you're living in a very good environment. You're very lucky to have such a wonderful family, Isabella. The word wonderful was emphasized sarcastically. Victoria and Julian exhaled in relief, thinking they had passed the test. They didn't know this was only the prelude. The real final act would take place tomorrow, at the last interview. And then, the stage would no longer be the dinner table, but a courtroom of truth. The next morning, the air in the house was even more tense than the night before. Victoria and Julian were wearing their best clothes, the ones they only wore for important occasions. They sat upright on the sofa, their faces solemn as if attending a coronation. The heavy lavender perfume Victoria wore filled the room, a scent that now made me nauseous. Daniel arrived exactly at 10, still in his elegant suit, but today, his eyes were colder than steel. He didn't sit down immediately. He placed his leather briefcase on the table, took out a small camera, and set it on the bookshelf facing the sofa. Just to record the session for proper procedure, he said evenly, not looking at anyone. Everything needs to be documented as evidence for the trust fund. Victoria and Julian nodded rapidly, without a hint of suspicion. They were too obsessed with the vision of $1.5 million to realize that the camera was not there to protect their rights. It was there to record their downfall. Shall we begin? Daniel said, sitting in the chair opposite them. After last night, I've formed some very positive preliminary evaluations. However, according to procedure, I need one final statement, an official affirmation from the head of the family. Ma'am. He turned to Victoria. For the sake of the recording, please give the most sincere statement about your feelings toward your daughter-in-law, Isabella. Here it was. The moment she had been waiting for. I saw Victoria take a deep breath, her eyes glistening as if tears were about to fall. She placed a hand on her chest and began the speech she had prepared so meticulously. Mr. Carter, she began, her voice trembling with emotion. I honestly don't know where to begin. Isabella. She is not just my daughter-in-law. From the day she stepped into this house, I have treated her as my own daughter. She paused, giving me a look full of affection. Julian, sitting next to her, nodded along enthusiastically. She is a blessing, she continued, her voice becoming more and more tearful. She has brought light to our family. She takes care of my husband, our frail old father, with a devotion that not even a biological child could guarantee. She loves little Alex like her own younger brother. And most importantly, she is a wonderful wife to Julian. Seeing them happy, I, as a mother, could not ask for more. This family would not be complete without Isabella. She is our treasure, sir. A priceless treasure. The speech ended in a silence full of fake emotion. Victoria even took out a handkerchief to dab at the corner of her eyes. An Oscar-worthy performance. Daniel nodded solemnly. Thank you. A very moving speech. Now, it's your turn, Miss Isabella. Do you have anything you would like to say? All eyes turned to me. Victoria looked at me expectantly, certain that I would respond with similarly grateful words. I slowly stood up, but I didn't look at Daniel. I looked straight at Victoria. I don't have anything to say, I replied softly. But, I do have a gift. A small gift to thank you, Mother, for all the love you have given me all this time. Surprise flashed across her face. A gift? Oh, you, such a polite girl. I said nothing more. I picked up the TV remote on the table. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pressed power. The 65-inch TV, the one I had bought for this house, lit up. But it wasn't a TV program. The screen was split into two. On the left was a compilation of video clips from the past weeks. Victoria laughing and holding my hand as we shopped. Her placing food into my bowl at dinner. Her hugging me and saying, "You truly are my precious daughter." The voice clear and sweet. On the right was a darker space, the image slightly grainier. It was footage from a hidden camera I had placed in the living room long ago. And then the audio played. A rougher sound, but unmistakable. It was Victoria's voice, that venomous whisper I had recorded that day. A horrific symphony of hypocrisy began. Left TV, sweet voice. "This dress is beautiful, my dear. It suits you so much." Right TV, hissing voice. A flirtatious woman like her always has ulterior motives. Left TV, cheerfully. "You're like my real daughter, Isabella." Right TV, contemptuous. "She's a washed-up old woman who's been married once already, clinging to my Julian like a starving leech." And then, the final blow. Left TV, tearful in the earlier speech. "She is our treasure, sir. Our priceless treasure." Right TV, sickening whisper. "I'm telling you, maybe she thinks Julian is too young, so she plans to seduce the father-in-law instead." The room plunged into dead silence, except for the monstrous contrast echoing from the TV. Victoria's face shifted through every expression. From surprise, to confusion, then to sheer horror as she heard her own voice. Her saintly mask shattered into pieces, exposing the true face of a demon. Julian's mouth hung open, staring at the screen and then at his mother, his face as white as paper. I glanced at William. He merely bowed his head, but I saw his shoulders tremble. And Alex, who had just come down the stairs, stood frozen. The boy looked at his mother, his clear eyes filled with disappointment and disgust. Daniel stood up, picked up the remote, and turned off the TV. The sudden silence made the room suffocating. He did not look at Victoria, who was gasping like a fish on land. He looked straight at Julian. "I divorced Isabella because I wasn't mature enough to protect her from outside pressures," Daniel said, his voice low and firm. "I've always regretted that. I hoped you, as her husband, would do better than I did. But you are worse. You didn't just fail to protect her, you helped the person tormenting her." Then he turned to Victoria, who sat motionless on the chair. "And you, ma'am. You performed beautifully. But there is something you need to know." He paused, letting the tension rise to its peak. "That will does not exist. That inheritance does not exist." He looked around the room, his voice ringing out like a final verdict. "This was all just a test. And you failed miserably." Daniel's final sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. That inheritance does not exist. 5 simple words, but with the explosive power of an atomic bomb, blowing apart all pretenses and laying bare greed and ignorance. The silence lasted about 3 seconds, then shattered with a piercing scream. No. You're lying. Victoria jumped up from her seat, pointing at Daniel, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. You're a fraud. You conspired with that whore to deceive my family. Julian. Call the police, son. Arrest them all. But Julian didn't move. He sat there, frozen, his face blank like someone struck by lightning. He looked at me, then at Daniel, then at his screaming mother. The truth was too brutal, too shameful for his weak mind to process. Daniel didn't bother to glance at Victoria. He calmly packed the camera into his bag. You can call the police if you want. But what will you tell them? That you're angry because you tried to take an inheritance that never existed? That you were tricked while trying to play the good person on camera? I don't think you want that little story about seducing your father-in-law spreading around, do you? Every word Daniel spoke was a dagger into her greatest weakness, her pride. Victoria froze. She realized she had been cornered. She couldn't sue. She couldn't do anything. She herself had provided the evidence against her. The humiliation of being led by her own greed crushed her. She staggered and collapsed onto the floor, no longer screaming, only letting out strangled whimpers. Daniel nodded politely at me. My job here is done. Good luck, Isabella. Then he turned and walked out of the house without looking back. The chaos was still there. Alex had run upstairs, slamming his door shut. Mr. William quietly stood up, walked back to his room, leaving the two of them in the ashes of the play. I knew I had nothing left to say there. I turned around, intending to leave. Isabella, wait. Julian finally reacted. He ran after me, grabbing my arm when I had just stepped out the door. Don't go, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We need to talk. I didn't want to talk inside that suffocating house anymore. Outside, was all I said. We went to a cafe very nearby. We sat across from each other in silence. He was the one who broke that silence first. Isabella, he began, his voice full of pain. I know I was wrong. I'm a terrible person. But please don't throw everything away. You don't love me anymore? That question, at this moment, sounded ridiculous. I slowly stirred my coffee, watching the brown whirlpool dissolving, just like our marriage. You're using the wrong word again, Julian, I replied, without looking at him. The issue here was never love. Number? Then what is it? He asked, his voice filled with confusion. If not love, then why did we get married? You got married because of love, I said, finally meeting his eyes. At least you thought so. As for me, now I realize, I got married because of hope. Hope for a new beginning after a broken marriage. Hope for a partner who would build a future with me. Hope for a happy family. I set the coffee cup down on the table, the porcelain clinking dryly. And you, as a husband, failed to provide all of that. You weren't a partner, you were a weak accomplice. You didn't build a family, you just tried to maintain a temporary ceasefire. Your love wasn't a shield to protect me. It was a cage, demanding that I endure suffering to keep it peaceful. I can change, he said quickly. I promise, Isabella. I won't let my mother treat you like that anymore. We can move far away. I laughed. A bitter laugh. Now, Julian? Now you talk about that. After I had to fight on my own. After I had to stage an entire play to save myself. Your protection comes too late. It's worthless now. Then what do you want? He asked, his voice almost desperate. You want a divorce? I want freedom, I replied, my voice clear and final. I want to live in an environment without hatred, without pretense, without filthy schemes. I want to be myself, not act out a role. And that, Julian, is something you can never give me, as long as you are still your mother's son. I stood up. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. I returned to that house one last time, not to argue, but to take what belonged to me. Victoria had gone into her room. Julian sat frozen in the living room. I went straight upstairs, packed my clothes and personal items into a suitcase. Before leaving, I knocked on Mr. Williams' door. He opened it, his eyes red. "You're leaving?" he asked softly. I nodded, stepped forward and hugged him tightly. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this," I whispered. "But you deserve more respect than that. Please take care of yourself. This family owes you an apology," he said, his voice choked. I knocked on Alex's door. He didn't open it, but I knew he was listening. "Alex," I said through the door. "No matter what happens, remember that I always saw you as my younger brother. Study well, live well, and never become a man like your older brother." I pulled my suitcase downstairs. Julian looked up at me, his eyes full of despair, but he didn't say anything. He knew everything was over. As I pulled the suitcase out the door, I didn't look back. I didn't cry. Not a single tear. There was only an immense sense of relief. The sound of the suitcase wheels rolling on the concrete pavement sounded like music. The music of freedom. Finally, I was free. The punishment for Victoria and Julian did not come from the law. I did not sue them. I did not demand a cent in compensation. I simply disappeared from their lives, and my absence, ironically, became the most brutal punishment. Victoria had to live with what she feared most: humiliation. The story of the inheritance play didn't need me to tell it. It grew wings and flew everywhere. Perhaps Mrs. Gable, her close friend, couldn't keep her mouth shut. Perhaps Julian himself, drunk, told someone. I didn't know and didn't care. I only heard vaguely from a few old acquaintances that Victoria had become a laughingstock of the whole neighborhood. "Have you heard about Mrs. Victoria?" people whispered to each other in the supermarket. So greedy that her daughter-in-law tricked her into a painful lesson. People say she even tried to slander her daughter-in-law for seducing her father-in-law. Truly shameless. Tangcame. She, the woman who had always lived on pride, now had to face pitying looks and quiet giggles behind her back every time she stepped out of the house. The fortress of hypocrisy she had spent her entire life building had collapsed in a single morning. Her greed and ignorance had been exposed publicly, unable to be covered up by anything. It was a life sentence with no possibility of pardon. As for Julian, he lost more than a wife. He lost the soft cushion that had sheltered him his whole life. Without me, he had to face his domineering mother on his own. Without me, he had to manage his own finances, take responsibility for everything himself. The world of an oversized child had come to an end. My life, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. After leaving that house, I rented a lovely studio apartment in the city center, overlooking a park full of trees. I used my savings, the money that Julian would have tricked me out of, to redecorate it exactly how I wanted. I painted the walls mint green, bought a very soft sofa, and dedicated a large corner to bookshelves and a work desk. This was my kingdom, a peaceful refuge free from the shadow of hatred. I focused entirely on my career. The anonymous email scandal was quickly resolved when I presented indirect evidence to Mr. Miller. The publishing house not only reinstated my book project but also assigned me to handle a series of major titles. Work swept me away, but it was an exciting, creative kind of busy. I rediscovered the passion that had grown cold after years of trying to please others. But my peace did not mean I became indifferent. I remained in contact with the only two people in that family who deserved my kindness. From time to time, I would pick up my dear father-in-law, Mr. William, and take him out to lunch. "You look so refreshed these days," he said during one meeting, smiling gently. "Like a flower that's finally had enough water." Because I'm living in the sunlight now, Dad, I replied. I no longer have to live in humiliation. I still secretly sent him the best medications by mail, along with audiobooks and the newest e-readers. With Alex, I became a long-distance big sister. Sometimes the boy would call me, his voice small. Sister Isabella, this essay is too hard, can you help me? Of course, kiddo. Email it to me. At home, it's awful, sis, he admitted once. Mom and Julian argue all the time. I just want to move out. Hang in there, I encouraged him. Focus on your studies. Just a few more years and you'll be in college and able to decide your own life. Don't let that toxic environment affect your future. You're a smart and kind boy, Alex. Hold on to that. I sent him good books, movie tickets, and occasionally a little pocket money. I didn't want him to feel abandoned. He was an innocent victim in an adult war, and he deserved someone who believed in him. One afternoon, while sitting on the balcony of my apartment, sipping tea and watching the sunset, I suddenly thought back to everything that had happened. I had once tried to use kindness to earn love, and I failed. In the end, I had to use their own greed to buy my freedom. I had to become tougher, more calculating, even somewhat ruthless, to escape the swamp. There are battles you cannot win with kindness alone. You must win with intelligence. You must understand your enemy better than they understand themselves. You must turn their weaknesses into your weapons. And the sweetest victory is not the moment you see them fall, but the moment afterward when you sit alone in silence and realize that you have regained peace in your soul. That peace is the true treasure, worth much more than $1.5 million. And that treasure is something no one can ever take away from you again. Now then, if you enjoyed this story, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and let me know which part surprised you the most. Every subscription and comment is a huge motivation for us to continue sharing more meaningful things in life. Thank you so much.